You notice it only after the sentence has already begun, the way your voice keeps moving even though nothing more is required. No one challenged you. No one demanded clarification. And yet you continue. You add context, soften edges, justify tone, explain intention, as if stopping now would expose something unfinished or unsafe. In that moment, a familiar pressure settles in your body, not panic, not urgency, but a quiet internal insistence that silence would be a mistake. That insistence does not feel like fear. It feels like instinct, and that is what should disturb you. What's unsettling is not that you explain yourself, but that the explanation arrives before choice does. The impulse comes first. The words follow. Only afterward does the mind assemble reasons that make the behavior seem appropriate. This is how conditioned responses operate. Your nervous system predicts danger in the absence of explanation, and the body moves to neutralize that danger before it can be consciously evaluated. Thought generates anticipation. Anticipation tightens the body speaks. The explanation brings relief, not clarity, not connection, but relief. And relief teaches faster than insight ever will. Over time, silence begins to feel intolerable. Not because something bad happens when you are silent, but because the system has learned that silence delays relief. Explanation becomes regulation. The urge strengthens. The threshold lowers. What once appeared only in tense moments begins to appear everywhere. You start explaining things no one questioned. You justify feelings no one criticized. You preemptively defend choices no one challenged. The behavior no longer responds to threat. It manufactures it. If the idea of stopping explanation feels irresponsible or even cruel, that reaction is not moral. It is conditioned. At some point, being understood became synonymous with being safe, and safety became synonymous with permission. So you learn to stay ahead of judgment by narrating yourself. You learn to translate experience before it could be misinterpreted. This worked. That's why it stayed. But working is not the same as being neutral. The cost is not only social, it is internal. The more you explain yourself, the less immediate your inner experience becomes. Emotions are evaluated before they are felt. Desires are revised before they are trusted. Decisions are filtered through imagined reactions before they are owned. Even when you are alone, the internal voice keeps rehearsing explanations for an audience that is no longer present. You are not simply communicating less freely. You are slowly losing contact with the place where certainty used to come from. This is where the behavior stops being a habit and starts becoming a trajectory. Each explanation reinforces the belief that your experience is provisional. Each moment of relief strengthens the system that demands permission. Silence begins to feel like withdrawal. The urge to explain intensifies not because you have more to say, but because the system has learned to stabilize itself this way. And systems that regulate anxiety do not weaken with awareness. They strengthen with repetition. Nothing has been resolved. Nothing has been offered to fix this. And that is intentional, because the most important pressure must remain intact. If this reflex continues uninterrupted, it will not simply shape how you speak to others. It will decide how much authority you are allowed to feel over your own inner life. And by the time that loss becomes obvious, it will already feel normal. Once a reflex survives long enough, it does not stay confined to the moment it appears. It begins to reorganize the space around you. This is where the problem stops being psychological in the narrow sense and becomes structural. The habit of explaining yourself quietly reshapes how you move through relationships, how you occupy roles, how you position yourself in systems that reward predictability and punish ambiguity. You start gravitating toward environments where explanation is expected, even praised. Workplaces where justification is mistaken for responsibility. Relationships where emotional clarity is demanded but never reciprocated. Social dynamics where being easy to understand is treated as being easy to manage. None of this feels imposed. It feels chosen, but the choice is already biased. From a CBT-aligned perspective, this is inevitable. Behaviors that reduce anxiety are not only repeated, they are accommodated. Your surroundings adapt to you and you adapt back. You become known as someone who clarifies, who smooths things over, who makes sense of themselves for others. That reputation carries consequences. People stop tolerating your silence. They expect access to your reasons. When you hesitate to explain, it is noticed, questioned, interpreted. The absence of justification becomes disruptive not because it is wrong, but because it breaks an established pattern. The system resists not the content of your silence, but the unpredictability it introduces. Over time, this dynamic relocates authority even further away from you. Decisions are no longer evaluated internally first. They are rehearsed externally. You imagine how they will be received before you decide whether they are worth making. This is how structural conditioning works. The environment does not need to coerce you. It only needs to consistently reward legibility and subtly punish opacity. You learn, without being told, that life is smoother when you remain explainable, and smoothness becomes the new definition of safety. What makes this especially corrosive is that it does not feel like loss. It feels like maturity. You are being considerate. You are being thoughtful. You are being emotionally intelligent. And yet, something essential is eroding. You begin to defer decisions that require internal certainty. You delay boundaries that cannot be justified rationally. You tolerate situations that feel wrong but are difficult to explain. Slowly, the center of decision-making migrates outward. The question, "What do I want?" is replaced by "How will this be understood?" And once that substitution becomes habitual, inner authority no longer disappears dramatically. It atrophies. This is why silence alone does not fix the problem. The moment you stop explaining, the structure you've been living inside reacts. Others fill the gap with interpretation. Some push, some withdraw, some escalate. And inside you, anxiety spikes, not because silence is dangerous, but because the system you depend on for orientation has been disrupted. Without explanation, you are temporarily disoriented. You don't yet know how to stand without translation. That discomfort is often mistaken for proof that silence is wrong, when in fact it is evidence of how much your sense of self has been outsourced. The re-hook must remain unresolved here. If your habit of explaining has quietly shaped the systems you live inside, what happens when those systems no longer function the way they used to? And you are forced to confront the absence of an internal authority that was never allowed to fully develop. If this structure were as stable as it feels, if it truly held all the power it appears to, there would be no opening left. You would simply live inside it, adapt, and slowly forget that anything else was possible. But systems like this are never as solid as they appear. They rely on one fragile assumption: that authority must always arrive from the outside first, and that assumption contains its own weakness. The reflex to explain does not persist because explanation is effective in the long term. It persists because it prevents one specific moment from occurring, the moment where you act or feel without first translating yourself. That moment has been avoided so consistently that it has come to feel dangerous. But danger is not the same as impossibility. Here is the contradiction the system depends on and fears at the same time. Your nervous system reacts most strongly not to sustained behavior, but to initiation. The discomfort you associate with silence, opacity, or non-justification does not live in the act itself. It lives in the anticipation of it. Before you stay silent, your body predicts what silence might cost you: confusion, rejection, loss of standing. That prediction generates anxiety, and anxiety triggers explanation before silence ever fully arrives. But when silence does occur, something unexpected happens. The catastrophe does not materialize. The body recalibrates. The threat signal weakens, not because the system has changed, but because it has been briefly bypassed. This is not empowerment. It is exposure. The system that has been organizing your life has a blind spot. It overestimates the danger of moments it has never allowed you to inhabit. It invests enormous energy in preventing initiation, because initiation is where identity evidence is created. Once something happens, even briefly, the system is forced to update, and updates threaten stability. This is why the reflex to explain appears so early, so urgently, and so convincingly. It is not trying to help you communicate. It is trying to prevent a piece of evidence from entering your own nervous system. Most people misunderstand this and turn it into effort. They try to push through the urge to explain. They frame silence as strength. That fails because it still treats the moment as a battle, and battles announce themselves. The system responds aggressively to anything that looks like defiance. What it does not respond to as quickly is what feels incidental, temporary, unremarkable. The problem was never that you couldn't hold your ground. It's that the ground was never allowed to form. This reveals the leverage point, but it is an uncomfortable one. Change does not come from trying to be more silent, more confident, or more contained. Those are identities, and identities trigger resistance. Change comes from allowing moments to occur that are too small, too brief, too ordinary to activate the alarm system fully. Moments where explanation simply does not arrive, not as a decision but as an absence. And because the absence is brief, the system tolerates it. It does not yet recognize the threat. Nothing has shifted yet in a lasting way. No authority has been reclaimed. But the illusion of total enclosure has cracked. Not dramatically, quietly. Enough to make one thing uncertain. If the system depends on preventing certain moments from happening, what would occur if those moments began slipping through, not as acts of rebellion, but as unnoticed facts of experience the system no longer knows how to erase? The moment a system senses that its predictions are no longer holding, it does not collapse. It adjusts. This is where most people misread what is happening and mistake a brief opening for lasting change. The first moments of silence, opacity, or non-justification do not destabilize the structure permanently. They alert it. The same mechanism that once rushed explanation forward now begins relocating its defenses. What was once anxiety about misunderstanding becomes anxiety about repetition. The system starts watching for patterns. It learns quickly what threatens continuity. And once it learns, it intervenes earlier, more subtly, and with greater precision. This is why leverage never feels stable. The first interruption often passes unnoticed because it does not yet carry meaning. It feels accidental, contextual, easy to dismiss. But the second time is different. The nervous system begins associating the absence of explanation with identity shift. The moment is no longer neutral. It becomes loaded. Anticipation intensifies. The urge to correct, clarify, justify returns with more force than before. Not because the silence failed, but because the system recognized what it implied. This is how conditioning protects itself. It does not oppose change directly. It reframes it as danger. At this stage, something important happens internally. You can no longer tell whether silence is silence or strategy. The moment you notice yourself not explaining, awareness itself becomes intrusive. The system interprets awareness as intent, and intent as threat. What once slipped through unnoticed now triggers self-surveillance. You begin monitoring your behavior, evaluating whether you are doing it right, questioning whether withholding explanation is authentic or manipulative. This internal monitoring is not accidental. It is the system's way of reclaiming authority by turning observation into pressure. This is where many people retreat. The discomfort returns, sharper and more confusing than before. The relief explanation once provided is now delayed but still available. The system offers a familiar exit. Just explain this once, just clarify so things feel normal again. And when you comply, the structure stabilizes. The anxiety drops, orientation returns. The system interprets this as confirmation that its intervention was correct. Silence is reclassified as unsafe. Explanation is restored as regulation. the loop tightens. What makes this stage unsettling is that insight no longer helps. You understand what is happening, but understanding does not dismantle the reflex. In some cases, it strengthens it. Awareness increases salience. Salience increases threat. The system adapts not just to behavior, but to consciousness itself. This is why change cannot rely on recognition alone. Recognition alters the terrain, but the terrain responds. And when it does, the original sense of leverage disappears, replaced by a deeper uncertainty. Now the question shifts again, and it is more destabilizing than before. If the system can adapt to silence, if it can co-opt awareness, if it can turn even non-action into a monitored event, then where does authority actually reside? Not in explanation, not in silence, not even in insight. At this point, the viewer should feel something essential slipping out of reach, not because it is gone, but because the usual ways of locating it no longer work. And that disorientation is not a failure. It is the last signal before the frame itself has to change. At some point, after explanation fails, silence destabilizes, and awareness turns inward on itself. The question of authority stops making sense in the way it once did, not because it has been answered, but because the system that demanded an answer has lost its grip. This is the shift most people miss because it does not feel like progress. It feels like something quietly dropping away. The effort to manage yourself, to monitor your reactions, to locate the correct posture toward others begins to feel strangely unnecessary. Not resolved, unnecessary. And this is unsettling because effort has been the organizing principle for so long that its absence feels like emptiness rather than freedom. What actually changes here is not behavior but friction. For most of your life, explanation was the path of least resistance. It restored equilibrium. It reduced anxiety. It brought orientation back online. Silence, by contrast, required effort. It demanded tolerance for uncertainty, misunderstanding, internal noise. But once the system has exhausted its ability to stabilize through explanation, the balance subtly reverses. Explaining starts to feel heavy. It interrupts something. It reintroduces tension rather than resolving it. You notice, without trying to, that explaining now costs more than it gives. Not morally, somatically. The body no longer relaxes afterward. Relief doesn't arrive. The old regulation pathway has worn thin. This is where inevitability replaces effort. Not because you decide to stop explaining yourself, but because continuing to do so no longer works. The system doesn't collapse, it reroutes. Presence becomes easier than management. Remaining with an experience becomes less effortful than translating it. Silence is no longer a strategy. It is simply what happens when nothing intervenes. You are not withholding explanations. You are failing to produce them because the internal demand has weakened. And without that demand, there is nothing to resist. Notice how different this is from control. There is no discipline here, no stance to maintain, no identity to protect. The shift happens beneath intention, the same way the reflex once did. What used to feel risky now feels neutral. What used to feel necessary now feels intrusive. You don't trust yourself more because you decided to. You trust yourself because there is no longer a competing system insisting you shouldn't. Inner authority doesn't arrive as a position you take. It arrives as the absence of constant negotiation. This is why nothing dramatic follows. Relationships don't explode. Conversations don't become confrontations. You simply stop orienting around anticipated reactions. When misunderstanding occurs, it passes without triggering correction. When judgment appears, it no longer demands management. Not because you are stronger, but because the internal mechanism that required management has lost its function. The world doesn't change all at once. Your relationship to friction does. And when friction shifts, behavior follows without effort. This is what it means when everything changes. Not that life becomes easier, clearer, or more affirming, but that the invisible work you were doing to remain acceptable quietly ends. You are no longer explaining yourself because There is no longer anything inside you asking for permission. Authority is not reclaimed. It is rendered irrelevant as a question. And in that irrelevance, something stabilizes, not loudly, not triumphantly, but enough that you can finally remain where you are without translating yourself into something safer.